I was riddled with fear. Oh my God, you've been a priest for 8 years. You studied for five. So many people have invested in you. You're on a very high track of great success, this and this and this. It was 1 year from that moment until I took any action. I wrestled with, I couldn't, how would it be? There were other moments that came along, but then I took the action. And I did it at that point because it was a more moment of, I knew I had a cold by that point. Something was off. And I needed to look at it and be like, okay, I need to really look at this. And that's when I took the action. But sometimes our intuition will show us something or something about our in our inside to help us see something.
Some people wait for life to fall apart before they actually make a change. Well, Brian Bachand, my next guest, is not one of those people. Brian has reinvented himself more times than I've probably changed my passwords. Priest? Yep, he's done that. New York executive? Definitely. Global advisor and founder? Absolutely. He doesn't just ease into change, he walks straight in with his eyes open and his shoulders back. Brian has this rare mix of spiritual depth and executive precision, and he's not afraid to call us out on our excuses that we all hide behind. He talks intuition, identity, messy middles in our episode, and that deliciously terrifying moment when you realize that you're actually meant for more. This conversation is one of my favorites. It's honest, it's funny, and just the right amount of trouble. Let's dive in. All right. Hello, Brian. I have been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. I would love it if you could introduce yourself today in your own words. So, not the not the professional bio LinkedIn version that we're all accustomed to hearing about ourselves, but just your own words. Who are you? And tell us a bit more about your story.
Charles, I'm so happy to be here. I was excited as well. I always love our conversations together, so thank you. And, I love that you said not to do the LinkedIn resume profile. I'm just going to say the life of Brian Bachand. I know I am a spiritual seeker. I'm someone that's here to bring light to the world and to help the world evolve.
Hmm. Okay. And so that if for someone who's listening, kind of standing on their own edge of change, tell us a bit more about what that means and how that would be applicable to people and how you work with people that way.
Sure. So, to break it down more concretely, go to the LinkedIn bio in resume, you'll see what I really do. But at the core of who I am, I know that's one of the missions that I'm here. And what does that mean? Every single person that is listening, and for those who are listening to this, I'm a firm believer that there's no coincidence. There's a reason. And we're here for a reason. We're here for a purpose. And our purpose, we can have multiple purposes. You can be, purpose to be a spouse, to be your child, you're employed, you might be something you do in the community. But there's a reason why you're here. There's a reason why you have certain gifts. There's a reason why you were born into the family you were born into. Even if you're like, oh my gosh, if you only knew my family. But there's a reason why you had those challenges. And there's something very powerful that the world needs from you. The world needs something from you. And so, that's the space that I work with individuals, many who are, professionals, high achievers. But there's a sense to really help them own that no matter what you're doing in your work or where you are, but there is a mission, there is a calling, there is something very specific only you can accomplish.
Hmm. Very interesting. There's often a moment, where the life you're living stops, I guess, fitting in many ways. People evolve, people change. What was because you've gone through so many different shifts and change and pivots along your own career and your own personal journey, Brian. What was the first small sign or shift that something needed to change for you? You've been a priest in the Catholic Church. You've been on, you've made your sort of transition to where you and I first engaged with each other, working for an executive search firm. You're now working and living overseas in Europe. Talk a little bit about what were the sort of the things that influenced those small shifts along the way that something needed to change for you as part of your own journey.
Great question. And that's why I called my company Evolution, Evolution, because I'm a firm believer we're always evolving and there's always those pauses and pivots. I would say, one of the things that happens is, it doesn't, we often think you have to be unhappy, for something to, I'm so unhappy, I'm so miserable to make a change. And sometimes that does happen. There can just be things that are just so misaligned with whether it's in a personal relationship or it could be a job that you really enjoy, but the past year and a half has just totally changed with a new boss or a new environment. But there's also that other space where you're happy. There's not a sense of discontent. You're enjoying, the work, but there's something inside that unsettled. And it's a feeling. And it's oftentimes something you just feel. You might not be able to articulate and it grows. It's kind of like that feeling like you can have a couple days before you get a cold that comes on. That feeling you have a couple days before, like, I don't know, just my nose is a little stuffier, but you're still doing things. You're not miserable. You're not staying home. And then it kind of builds and then it hits. And I think that's an important phase that's what happened with me in some of my big moments is, it was just a sense of it built over time. Like I wasn't miserable. I wasn't unhappy, but sometimes there are things inside us that need to, really just, take time to build. And I think that's one of the things that's really important in paying attention to that. And it can be senses of you go to an event and there's something missing. You see something and you're like, wow, I'm really inspired. I would love to look at that. You have no idea how to go in that direction. That's what happened to me. But there's something that draws you in, even though you might be fearful or unknown. It's that sense it builds. It builds. And I think that has probably been for myself, probably the area that's happened the most when I make decisions. It's just something that's building.
I love that. So let's pause for a moment because I think what you said is really important, and often in some of the conversations you and I have had in the past, I've often thought that in many ways we've kind of ignored that sort of intuition feeling. We expect it to be a big, bold thing that occurs to us to be able to precipitate that change or that pivot. And in many ways, I think we've all, as you've described it, sort of intuitively know or you have that feeling, whether it's those goosebumps or that pit in your stomach, there's something that gives you some sort of sensation where you feel that something is off for you. You feel that you could use a change. And even when you're content, it's just, we've kind of not encouraged ourselves to kind of scratch that itch or kind of explore that curiosity in many ways. Because, in many ways, one side of the brain says you have to be very logical about your approach, whereas the other side of the brain says, you have to feel things with your heart and kind of explore. And how do you kind of correlate between those two sides, particularly those who live in kind of the orderly, kind of individualistic societies where things are very rigid, very logical, sequential in their movement versus those who are a bit more open-ended and willing to explore and kind of, sort of something piques their interest. How do they explore those opportunities there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, first of all, all of us have both inside of us. All of us have that intuitive side. And I'm sure many of, are also very logical and, they want to, pay their bills and have a good life and different things. So I think, one of the things to be aware of is that it's both, our intuition oftentimes, will connect with us and show us something or make us feel something. And it does something in the moment, and I'll illustrate this with an example. From my own personal life was, I was a priest. I was, chief of staff working for a cardinal. And it was one night when I went for a walk and I was very happy in the work I was doing, but there was definitely something I was feeling that sense like I feel like I might be coming down with a cold, but you deny
Right.
it, but you deny it. Oh
Right.
no, it's allergies, it's this, it's that.
Right.
And that's how I
Yeah.
was feeling in life. And
Okay.
one night I
Huh.
was out for a walk and I was on a sidewalk and I was dressed casually. I had an evening, it was off. And all of a sudden I saw two couples that came out of a restaurant. I was on a sidewalk, I saw it, and they were simply saying good night to each other. They had both come from work, they had their work bags, they were saying, so nice to see you, we'll see you soon. And I remember that moment observing this, and this was all probably within about 10 to 20 seconds. And it was like the world stood still, and I was like, I want that. I want that. I want to be able to love another person. I want to be able to use the gifts of my life and who I am and bring it in a different way. And it was a sense of, wow, there was just such a beauty. It was such a light, a connection, an energy. But by the time I walked one block, I felt that. But by the time I got back to the cathedral rectory where I was living, and I put my hand on the doorknob, in that moment, I was riddled with fear. Oh my God, you've been a priest for 8 years, you studied for 5, so many people have invested in you, you're on a very high track of great success, this and this and this. It was 1 year from that moment until I took any action. I wrestled with, I couldn't, how would it be? There were other moments that came along, but then I took the action. And I did it at that point because it was a more moment of, I knew I had a cold by that point, something was off. And I needed to look at it and be like, okay, I need to really look at this. And that's when I took the action. But sometimes our intuition will show us something or something about our inside to help us see something. And then our logic will then step in. It's like, well, my first step was, you know what? I need to talk to somebody. I made the appointment. Then I started kind of looking at, practically, what would that mean to look at? What would I do? How would I write a resume? Then the practical side came in and it balanced out. Because just because you feel something in a moment doesn't mean you have to, it wasn't like that night I went home and packed up my bags. It was a year later before I took time. So that's just to say it's in partnership. It's in partnership how that works.
Great story. I mean, so how it's interesting because I think the thing that most of us struggle with as we hear that story is you have the feeling, but how do you follow it up with action? Like you talked about the fact that it wasn't something that you just immediately, it wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, right? But you felt that feeling, and you took one step in front of the, put one step in front of the other, and didn't see the full staircase, but you just took one step at a time. How do we, as individuals or human beings, how do we fall through on that action? I think this is where all of us kind of fall short. We have that feeling. For those of us who are in tune with the way we're feeling and decide to act on it, how do we follow through with the action? And how did you decide to not second guess that feeling and continue to pursue this opportunity as well of leaving the priesthood then?
Yeah, well, I think first of all, the greatest thing you can do is don't judge what you're feeling in the moment. That's the first thing we do. We start judging immediately. I shouldn't be feeling this way, Like there I am as a priest, dedicated 8 years, high profile, all those sites, all these people. It was a sense of, oh my God, like I shouldn't be feeling this. This is wrong. So we often do that. So it's okay. Don't judge that you're feeling, wow, like, you know what, like I'm just really unhappy in this relationship. Or there's something here that I'm not enamored by what the company's trying to do anymore. There's something, I don't know what it is. So don't judge it, just recognize it and allow it to fester a little bit. Allow it to be there. Ask questions, talk to someone, if it keeps going, speak to someone, that you can really trust. My number one piece of advice on that is hold your cards close. Meaning, when you're in that moment of, oh, I'm feeling something, this happened to me, people often say, am I crazy? The good thing is don't overshare when you don't have clarity. Because when you overshare, when you don't have clarity, everyone is going to try and give you their piece of advice, tell you what to do, and it creates more uncertainty. So speak to a professional person, speak to a trusted friend, speak to someone that you really just want them to help, because that's number one. And then I think at that moment, when you start to look at that, that's when you can start to really examine, wow, there's something going on here. And here's the next right action. You also have to realize you're not going to know every right action until you take the first one
Mm,
and then the second one.
mm.
The actions will continue to show up and you'll continue to feel it and see it. But sometimes the actions only become clear once you start taking the first and the second and the third.
I love that. And what you said is very interesting, but it is probably a challenge for most of us, particularly in this day and age of 2025 in terms of sharing, right? We're all so
Oh,
explicit
too
about
much.
wanting to share. It's too much, Brian. I mean,
Ridiculous.
it's something I've even had to grapple with, and just in terms of my own journey as as a professional speaker and also as an author and consultant, and all, in terms of how much to share, how much not to share, and for someone who was on one end of the continuum of not sharing much and now moving slowly towards the middle and sometimes even veering towards the too much, I feel like how do you rectify that? Because when someone has a problem, it's as if they want, depending on where you are in life, they want the entire world to chime in. And then you're right. Then we get upset when everyone gives us all these different opinions, and we get even more, sort of circular in terms of everyone providing their own piece of feedback and trying to figure, well, what makes the most sense? Is it this person's feedback, my parents, spouse, partner? Yeah, that whole oversharing can be a challenge, particularly in this day and age where it almost seems like it's the norm rather than the exception.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a couple very high profile people I follow, on their part. And there's one of them, I love this individual. They're an incredible author, speaker. They've been kind of a mentor to me in many ways, from a distance. But, there are times when I listen to this person and they're interviewing someone, no matter what the person says, like if they say, I was abducted by aliens, like I was too. Like, you know what I mean? When I was 6, I had a dream. It's like, okay, just too much, like too much. Like I find people like, it's like any of us, right? Like sometimes when you hear someone say like, oh, I went to Japan on vacation. If you've been there, you get excited like, oh, I went to Japan too. There's a connection. People want to we're designed for that. But I think one of the things you have to be aware of is it's powerful when you share your story. It is powerful when you share vulnerability. There's nothing the matter with that. And it can be very powerful, especially if you're in a leadership role or as a speaker, to be able to do that. However, not everything has to be shared, because only if you share, if it's you've done the work and the healing. That's number one. I think a lot of people overshare and they haven't done the work.
The
They
healing. I
do
love
it.
that.
Yeah,
Mm.
they do it because, I'm supposed to share and it makes me well, no.
Does
Because
the sharing
sometimes
become part of the healing, Brian? Does the sharing
Yeah,
have to be?
without a doubt. But part of it is also a sense of, have you done some of the inner work for yourself? Like, are you comfortable to talk about certain things? I think that's number one. Number two, there are certain things that you may not have to share on a public forum. You may only share it with one or two people in your life because it's all that's needed to be. And it doesn't make it less. You know, when sometimes you start thinking, well, if I share this and this, it will bring me even more of attraction to do it. You always have to ask you, what's the intention of sharing? What's the intention of sharing? And I think it just has to be monitored that way. It can be very powerful. I know for me, when certain people have shared certain things, it is very inspiring and it can make you be not alone. But I think as individuals, we always have to ask, why are we sharing this? What's the intention? Is it just to get likes and be more popular, or is it really to make an impact? And am I ready to share this? Am I ready to share it?
Like, so interesting. I mean, you talked earlier about the fact that the process that you went through in terms of leaving the priesthood, was there part of that transition that no one had prepared you for as part of that transition over the course of the year? So anything that surprised you emotionally or even spiritually as part of that transition away from the church? And when I say away from the church, I mean maybe you were still a part of the community of the church, or Talk a little bit more about that in terms of your own sort of engagement with the Catholic Church and how that looks now going forward.
Actually, I mean, great question. That's a really great question.
Thank you.
No one prepared anything for me. It was uncharted territory.
Okay.
It's not like there's like a group they put you in touch with and say, "Oh, this is the people that say, da da da." It's some of the things I've done since I've left to help others. But I mean, and this goes back to your other great question earlier, that there was a sense once I started taking the actions of things that that's where my logical side of who I
Oh.
am really stepped in, because I was able to then be like, okay, like I need to get a resume. I need to apply for jobs. This is the timeline I'm looking at. Here's the financial aspect I want to be at. So that's where the practical side, the logical side, the strategic side stepped in and balanced out kind of the intuitive side that led me to really examine where things were looking at. I think for me, the biggest thing that happens that never could have prepared me in any way, shape, or form was when I left the priesthood. I moved to New York City, and that's where I knew that's where I wanted to live in Manhattan. I was very fortunate. I had a great job to go to, day one when I landed. But the biggest thing that no one prepared me for was the total emptiness of never hearing from people again.
Ah.
And that was the biggest insight that I ever received in my life, that I think really shaped really the course of how I navigate, especially through business. So I'll give an example. It was very interesting. There were many people, when you left the priesthood, I worked for a cardinal. I was young, but I was well connected with a lot of people. It was amazing. The day after I left, I never heard from, I would say, just about all of them ever again.
Wow.
There was a handful that have kept in touch. And it was amazing. And that's been common from other priests I know who have left. That's a very common trait. And that really was a real eye opener for me, because
Disappointed?
I wasn't angry. I wasn't just, I
Okay.
think, what it showed me? At first it was just jarring. I was just like, wow, like you go through this training and, you think it's of love and God and do the right thing. And it was the most judgmental thing I'd ever experienced.
Interesting.
And I think, but there were some that weren't like that. But it was only a handful. And I can honestly say that. But what it showed me is, when you make a decision, whether it's to leave a job, leave a relationship, leave maybe a particular craft that you do. Maybe you've been a lawyer for so many years and now you want to open up a jewelry store, you have to be prepared that there will be many people you'll never hear from again, or that don't want to no longer be affiliated with you because there's nothing you can do for them, or they don't identify for that. And that's why I say you have to make sure you've done your own work. Because if I hadn't done that, I think I would have crumbled by that or felt rejected. At the same time, it was shocking. It was like, wow, I didn't hear from them. But at the same time, I was very secure and extremely confident because I knew I made the right decision and I was able to move on and really look at them with more compassion, that while that's kind of sad, that's how they look at that. So that was probably the biggest thing that I was not prepared for.
Interesting. And when you said earlier the notion of being able to do the inner work, what is that for those who are listening? What does that entail? What does that mean? Is it asking sort of thoughtful and introspective questions of yourself and just sort of sitting with it? And like, what does that look like? What are sort of the activities that you went through for your own self?
Yeah. So, I think for everybody, that's a great follow up. So, inner work, it's such a cliche, you know what I mean? You hear people kind of buzz that. So I'm glad we're defining that. Inner work is just simply reflection. It's really what it is. And it's allowing yourself to reflect upon what's happening, and giving yourself permission to be open to what is trying new to come into your life. And what does that mean? So that can mean on a few things. It can just mean, it might mean for somebody taking their dog and going for a walk every morning and asking themselves, like, where do I want to be 1 year from now? Like, what is it that I want to do? What are my top 3 things that mean the most to me? And what is it bringing me joy? It may be someone that is able to do that and just quickly get to clarity. It may be someone else, like what I had to do, and I know so many others, that, when I, in a moment of transition, it was cloudy. When I finally realized, like, okay, I really need to look at things, I went to go work with someone professionally and just simply say, listen, I'm really confused. I'm feeling this. And we started to kind of unravel what was really taking place that brought clarity over several months. And by doing that, it helped me to have, okay, this is what I want to do, and make those right next decisions, and look at that. For someone else, it may mean reading a book, that came recommended to them, that say, hey, this is a great book, or a podcast that they listen to on their way to work that helps them think through things. Whatever it is, it's a sense of just reflecting on life. There's a lot of noise. There's a lot that has our attention.
Yes.
So we have to make sure that there's some space to just reflect on what's trying to get our attention. Because the thing is, if you don't, it's going to get louder until you do listen.
And in many cases, it can be, I don't want to say, you sound fatalistic about it, but it can be too late if you wait till the very end, or wait till things, you realize that you start to, it's hard to discern your own inner voice versus what's being said to you externally, and kind of differentiating between the two. And I think so when you talk about sort of the shifting between, again, leaving the priesthood to pursuing it. So where did you end up going to in New York? Where did you end up working in New York?
So my first job, I was a director with the American Cancer Society on 32nd Street. Yeah.
Got it. Wow. So what did that, before you arrived at that next chapter, what did the in-between look like? What did that year, I love that you said earlier, there's no hotline that you call to say, hey, 1-800, I'm leaving the priesthood type of thing, and this is what you can do. But did you question yourself through that process? Did you know, it's one thing to kind of take the step sequentially, one step after another, but did you start thinking like, oh, maybe this is not the right thing for me to kind of pursue whatever my next step is? Maybe I was being a bit too judgmental, or maybe I read too much into the situation or the scenario. Can you talk about what that in-between looks like? Because we often think about things in the extreme, when you make the decision and when you landed at the next role. But what did that mushy middle look like?
Yeah, for me, I continued to work, 100%, for the Cardinal. And I remember the night I told him when I was, wanted to leave, he told me, he said, I had no idea you're going through this. You still gave me 150%, and I'm here to also support you. So, I continued to work. It wasn't like I need to take a break. And, no, for me, I was just like, no, I can do this. I continued to go every single week to see the therapist that I was working with. And what started to happen in the sessions for me is, it started to unravel of what I was feeling. And then other things started to come up, some things with family, expectations. So I never would have planned those things. And once I started to deal with those things, it helped me. And I remember then thinking, well, when do I want to really move on this? Because I was like, when would I like to move on this? And I remember thinking, this is where the logical side came in. I was like, you know what? I want to speak to the Cardinal. I want to speak to my family in October. This is who I'm going to speak to first. My goal would be, I don't want to leave until January in the new year, and I want to leave with a job. I want to go to New York. So those steps started to help to move towards things, which were very, very important. But I think, the real challenge, and this is something to keep in mind, this was my experiences, I had the confidence, I knew it was there. I just knew that was the right decision to do for so many reasons. It really became very clear for me that was the right step. But there can also be some curveballs that can come along. So for me, literally 2 weeks before I was going to speak to my family, my father was diagnosed with cancer at a very late stage. And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, what does this mean? And, all these different things. But I remember, there's always going to be a reason to not do something. It's like a relationship. If you're dating someone, there's always a reason when not to break up. Oh, well, next month is, Christmas. I'll wait till the new
Right.
year. And then you don't do it. And then it's like, well, Valentine's Day is coming up.
Exactly.
So one of the lessons I learned is there's always going to be something that could prevent you from making a decision. And I still didn't move forward on the plan. And it actually, it was a gift. And it was something that even in those transition moments, I think, to be quite honest, because my dad was in a different moment, in a very difficult moment with the cancer, I found that he was even more attentive in a very beautiful way. That I'm not saying he wouldn't have been before, but I think there was even more of a compassion because he was realizing his life was, probably on a much more defined timeline. And I think he wanted my life to be truly alive and blessed. So it actually turned out to be a very beautiful thing.
Beautiful. Wow. And as you leaving the priesthood, moving to New York, you took on a number of corporate development, fundraising, business development related roles. And then, you created Evolution, which you talked about earlier. What did you know you wanted to do differently from any of the previous sort of chapters along your sort of career? What was it that kind of instigated that pivot as well for you to be able to pursue the world of entrepreneurship in your own business, in your own shop?
Yeah, I think, for myself, I was highly driven, and I will own that. I think, coming from working for the role that I had within the church, the cardinal, and then going to New York City, I was driven. Like I was driven to really grow. I landed in the world of philanthropy, but I really enjoyed it, and I really was driven to be a top tier. And so that was a part of my life, especially after leaving the priesthood. I also look back now, there was also a little bit of, I wanted to prove myself outside of the church, that Brian could be seen as not as, church Brian, but as executive Brian. And I think I got to a moment, and this was quite challenging when I decided to form the company. I struggled for a couple months. So talk about a messy middle. Leaving the priesthood was easier than starting the company.
How so? Wow.
Because my ego was raging when I was trying to start the company. I knew I had left the firm. I knew I was going to start it. I wanted to do something, but I gave myself a couple months off just to enjoy. And then I started to get to work, and I was raging. My ego is just on full throttle of, this has to be a success. What does it have to be? I have to work at this tier. And it kept blocking me, to be quite honest with you, because it was blocking what was trying to come through, because my ego is so focused on, it has to be a great success. It has to be this. I don't have the clarity, da, da, da. So finally, I was given some great advice by someone that simply said, give yourself some more time. And when I did, I finally gave myself the opportunity to go do some things, to travel, to go on this wellness retreat in Australia that gave my trueness to come out. That it wasn't driven by ego, it was driven by a sense of who I really am and what I really wanted to bring into the world. And that changed how that moved forward.
Interesting. And do you think the ego was based on wanting to prove those that you left behind in your previous roles, to show that you could also be, you talked about church Brian and sort of kind of the executive corporate Brian, and then you wanted to show that you could also be as equally successful as entrepreneurship Brian as well? Were you to yourself and to others too?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there was fear, to be honest with you. I look back now, I can honestly say, I think there was fear of, fear of, am I going to be at the right financial level? Fear of how I'm going to articulate myself, fear of how I'm going to get people in. And so I think, I think that was a driving force as well. I mean, thankfully it did start to level out and I was able to work through it, but that was a big piece. That was a big piece for a while.
Yeah, it's something we all struggle with today. I think about my own journey as well. And and the fact that I've left sort of the corporate world. And a lot of friends and family that I come across will often say, how are things going? Are you getting paid to speak? Are these the types of stages you go on? And not that I want to dissipate their excitement and enthusiasm, but I have to remind them that I'm now starting a new journey. And so I can't reasonably expect at the outset that I'll be as successful or earning a certain level of income as I was from the corporate job that I left behind. And so I'm trying to be open to the process. And yes, of course, I want to attain to that, if not higher. But I have to remind myself, like, if I was returning back to the corporate world, well, then I've got street cred. I've got the evidence of excellence, and I've got that lived experience. Whereas this is all new, and people are like, well, we don't know who you are. Show us, prove to us that you can actually do what it is that you can say that you can do. And I think I have to build a bit more of a credibility book or evidence of excellence in this new endeavor to be able to show that I am actually capable of doing these things that I've said, in order to be able to equate that to the income that I'm asking for or demanding as well. So very similar to kind of your experience as well. Yeah. So for someone listening who feels that pull towards kind of change but doesn't know where to start, what's one small question they can ask themselves today?
What do I desire?
Hmm.
Second question is, what brings me joy?
Mm.
Two simple questions. To ask yourself that question of, what do I desire? Is a great one, because it can kind of help redirect. As I mentioned, you just going back to sharing about starting the company, my ego was like in the way that, I was trying to figure everything out. And finally, when someone said, take some time, I asked myself that question. What do I desire to do with some more time? And it was just instant. It came to me as that I want to travel. I want to travel. I want to go someplace I've never been. And I want to do like a retreat, like some type of wellness retreat. And literally within 48 hours, I had a trip to Australia booked for 3 weeks where I'd never been, in a wellness retreat that truly changed the rest of my, I think, adult life. And that's where I formed the company. So by asking that question, it just intuitively came like, this is what I desire. That's what I want to do. And usually when you ask that, you get the answer, the inclination, things line up usually with greater ease. When you ask yourself, what brings me joy, it's a great thing, especially if you're feeling stuck. If you're feeling so stuck, whether it's in work, in a relationship, or, you're stuck with looking at your house like, oh my God, I can't stand this kitchen. I can't stand the way the driveway is. This is driving me. Say, well, what would bring me joy? And just, what would bring me joy? Like, what brings me joy in a house? And you realize maybe it isn't the kitchen, but it's really having a space that you could to do some writing and have a beautiful desk with a laptop that you can go in. And so you're focused on the kitchen, but it's really that other room on the third floor that's filled with junk that if you clear out, it really would bring you joy because you really want some own space. Those simple questions connect you to your heart, and they connect you to creativity, and they connect you to really an openness. Those are simple things to ask.
I love that. What do I desire and what brings me joy? Such simple questions, and often we don't ask ourselves these thoughtful questions. And I find that we're very reliant on what the outside world tells us what we should enjoy, what things that we should enjoy, what brings us desire, right? I think they're all the things that we all typically associate with, whether it be fame or fortune or anything in between, right? And we often don't ask ourselves, what are the things that bring us joy and what do we desire, and taking that time to reflect on that, and then looking forward to building a plan to figure out what can I do to achieve those things that bring me joy, or the things that I desire as well. I love that.
And just one last comment, just to build on is, for anyone who's listening who's really cerebral, or for anyone who's like, big executive saying, well, I work, 14-hour days and I'm in finance, and, like, what a stupid thing to ask. They might be thinking, what brings me joy? If you're feeling that, then those questions really are for you.
Huh.
So if there's a sense, pay attention to when I said those two things. If you're kind of having an argument in your mind, like, oh, that's so ridiculous, or that's so dumb. Those questions really are for you.
I love that. And why? Uh-huh.
Well, they're for you because there's something really beautiful that's trying to reconnect with you. And, your your brain is trying to talk you out of something. When you ask yourself what brings me joy, it brings you to your heart and it gets you out of your head. Because usually when you think of joy, you don't think of, spreadsheets. You know what I mean? You don't think of, working under intense deadlines or feeling anxious going to a meeting. What you think of is, oh my gosh, I loved that, that last summer when I got to finish building the back deck of the house. And I loved that feeling of like that the kids were out there and we had a good meal and I was able to finish everything up. I loved that I got that grill and we had those long summer nights, with food outside. It was just magical. Yeah, that brings you joy. And you're going back to that because you're missing that connection. So those simple questions bring you back to your heart, bring you back to what's connecting you, and oftentimes what you really desire more of in your life.
And I think yeah, I love that. I love the simplicity of that. And I love the fact that you even question those that'll be skeptical about asking those questions. Cause I think there are a number of people who are listening who'd be like, I don't have time for that. I don't have time to have that reflection. I don't have time to answer those questions. But I think your point around those who ask those questions or those who are skeptical of those questions need it most is very important and very key. Um, so right now, where's your curiosity or energy pulling you towards? What are you working on next?
I have to say, I'm speaking to someone right now, looking at you that, is a great example to me. I mean, you've written your amazing book, which is just incredible about your travel around the world. And I really think, it's been this labored dance for me to finish my book. And,
Yeah, we talked
because
about that.
yeah, and it's been something that has just been a labor. I was given some very wise words by someone a few months ago that said, I think when you're not writing, you really are writing. And that really helped me because I was being very judgmental of myself. I was in such a good, rhythm of getting everything done. I was so close. And then, and I look back and I'm like, you know what? The past several months, there's been so many things that have happened in my own life that I'm like, now I know why there was that pause of not writing because now it's even richer and I can write it in a different way. So for me, that definitely has my attention because I know there's something there that really needs to come out in a beautiful way. And it's, after working with so many people and so many executives and so many individuals in moments of, evolution, I just feel it's time to really put that message out in a new way through the book. And so that has really got my attention.
I love that. Beautiful. Well, Deb, I think based on our conversation today, those who are listening will no doubt want to learn more about the book, want to hear more about the book, what the plans are, the details. I mean, because Brian, you've got such a wealth of stories and insights from your own unique experience that you'll bring to our conversation today, and I know to the stories that you'll be bringing and putting together in your book as well. So we look forward to hearing more about that as well. And so maybe just for the next few minutes, just a quick series of questions, lightning round questions. What's a book you return to often?
A book I return to often. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I would say a book that I return to often is actually it's a book, but it was based on talks. It's by Lee Harris, and it's called Energy Speaks. And for those who don't know who Lee Harris is, you can look him up. He's British. He lives in the United States. He's an energy intuitive channeler, and these were basically talks he had given, kind of channeled conversations over many, many years that had been transcribed. into a written format. And there are topics that are beautiful on finance, on relationships, on family, on career. It's great. I have to say that book I have a hard copy version of the book, not an electronic one on this one. And I have more highlights, pages turned, notes in it. And it's something every time I go back to it, it just really speaks. There's something there I just really love that book. And yeah, it's always a go-to. It's always
Love
a go-to.
That. Well, is there a moment that's recently made you laugh?
A moment that's, yeah, I think a moment that recently made me laugh. I don't know where I live, obviously in Switzerland. I go for these big, long hikes. And I was by myself on this trail and I don't know what it was. There was this funny bird that landed on my path. They kept walking with me and I started talking to it. It was like in a funny way. I was having this funny conversation with it. And it was just hilarious. And I started laughing. I started laughing because I just thought it was so funny that I was talking to this bird in this funny voice and that the bird was there. And I found it so playful and I just started laughing. And
How long did this conversation go on for, Brian?
Oh, I'm not going to say that now, but no, I would say, it wasn't long. It was just a minute or so. The bird was there, a minute, 2 minutes. But then I just started laughing because it just struck me so funny. And that the bird was hopping along the path. It wasn't flying, but it was hopping. It was just so funny. And I don't know what it was. It just made me laugh. It just made me laugh.
Nice. I love that. And one last question. Where is a place in the world where you feel most like yourself?
A place in the world I feel most like myself recently, it's interesting. There is something about when you think of the word home. I grew up in Boston, and this past year I spent a lot of time in Boston because my mom had some health issues, and I've been back and forth quite a bit. And in the town where I grew up, I've gone back there several times. There's this beautiful state park. And I grew up going to that park as a kid. I used to ride my bike through there. And now, many, many, many years later, when I go in there, I just feel this connection to Brian at all parts of my life.
Ooh, I like that.
It's really beautiful. And it's funny, not to get I walk in these gorgeous trees and I'm like, these trees have seen me ever since I was a kid. And it's just, I find it really beautiful. I love
that.
Yeah, that's been very unexpected. And when I go back, I can't wait to go in there. It's been especially this year, it's been a really special moment. I feel just an integration of all my years when I'm in there.
This is not only have the trees matured, but the trees have seen you mature as an individual and as a person as well. Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Brian, thank you.
Thank you.
Sharing your clarity, your heart, your presence as always. And to everyone who's listening, take one idea or one question from today and give it space this week. I love what you've done and use the intention that Brian has so eloquently shared with us as well. We'll leave it there until next time. Thank you so much, Brian, for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a real gift. Thanks so much, Charles.